If you've been on the internet for more than 5 minutes, you've probably heard all sorts of language learning advice. Things like you have to speak from day one, or no, you need to wait till you're fluent, or Anki's the best, or Anki's boring and you need to watch movies. So today, we're going to cut through all the noise. I've actually collected 20 of the most common pieces of language learning advice, and we're going to rank them on an ultimate tier list. We'll be starting all the way down at the D tier, the time wasters, and working our way up to the S tier, the non-negotiables for reaching fluency. My hope is that by the end of this video, you'll have a no-fluff, clear roadmap to how to learn a language efficiently and effectively. Okay, so kicking things off with the D tier, these are things that waste your time, build bad habits, or just actively slow your progress. Now, one advice I got early on in my journey was to focus and hone in on grammar explanation, since that can be one of the most complex parts of most languages. This is something that I like to dub the school rule, since you're just memorizing a bunch of grammar patterns weeks before you even learn how to say hello. My main complaint with this piece of advice is it almost urges learners to go into sentences and pick them apart like math equations. This can lead to a lot of overthinking and less inherent curiosity in the language itself. Grammar is meant to explain what you've already seen and not replace the actual exposure you get when interacting with a language in all sorts of formats. One example would be conjugation tables. Now, while these are helpful at a glance and you'll actually see them pop up a lot in the beginner level textbooks, I spent way too long studying these, and I could have better spent that time looking at example heavy resources for grammar, such as Tai Kim's Grammar Guide or even Sakubi. Then, that would have saved a lot more hours with how these are packaged, and I could have taken that saved time and dedicated it towards watching or reading native content. Another one people bring up a lot, and this is a pretty big buzzword, is passive immersion. Now hold on. Passive immersion plus comprehensible input is great. I use it even to this day, but a lot of people hear the passive immersion part and then instantly think, okay, so I just need to listen to Japanese or whatever your target language is and you'll get fluent. And that's not exactly how it works. I'd seen maybe one 10-second clip of an age-adder explaining how they listen to Japanese all day, 10 hours a day, headphones in, and I started to do the same thing. I had this obscure Japanese radio app on my phone where I could zoom in on a map and hover over radio stations. So I did that, and I had Japanese radio stations and TV and anime blasting all day while I was doom scrolling on Instagram in English, and I called it immersion. Now there's a common counter argument that we were all raised in our native language passively. We were able to speak before even getting into grade school. Now the main issue here is that our parents weren't reading their quantum physics research papers to us as babies. They were using very simple vocabulary, going milky, milky, or dada, dada. Raising a kid is basically a natural SRS. Some of the first words that have come out of all of our mouths are either mama or dada. I don't know why I said it with a Japanese accent, but you get what I'm saying. Something I started doing that really helped me was just searching comprehensible input over on YouTube and listening to podcasts such as Nihongo Konteppe or Yu no Nihongo Podcast. This comprehensible input content uses varying levels of Japanese, so you just need to go out and find one that matches where you're at. The last item in the D tier is forcing early output or speaking. Now, someone whose goal is to just converse with other people in Japanese, I'm guilty of just downloading HelloTalk and flocking straight to talking to other people, both on the phone and text, using Google Translate where I could to try to output and figure out if I could make Japanese sentences. This kind of ties in with that incomprehensible input from earlier, because not only can you not understand what your language partner is saying, but if you're Google translating whatever you're trying to say and pasting it straight in, you're not even going to know what you're saying. That's incomprehensible output. A lot of people do want to work on their accents and trying to sound more natural, but there are better ways to do that, and this way is just going to be a big time waster. A better use of your time would just be focusing on building up that listening comprehension, and then once you feel like you can understand natural sentences and recall words more naturally, then you can start gentle outputting, whether that's internal monologues or writing in your journal. Alright, now we're moving up to the C tier. While most of the advice in here is harmless and has good intentions, the returns on them are not as good. Now, one thing I've seen, unfortunately, is just memorizing random word lists without context. You've probably seen tons and tons of decks on the internet, and setting aside the core decks, which we'll get into later, there's a lot to choose from. I think early on in my study journey, I downloaded a 10,000 word deck of just Japanese nouns. A lot of the words in here were common-ish, and a lot of them were not at all. But for every flashcard I was doing in here, I wasn't really getting a good bang for my buck. A better alternative, and once again, we will get into some of these later, are using the core 2K or 6K frequency decks, or even just mining words that you encounter during your immersion in anime or books. Now, another piece of advice that does have good intentions, but can actually add a lot of time, depending on where you're at in your language journey, is changing your device's language settings. I remember when I was 3 months into learning Japanese, I changed my iPhone settings to Japanese as well, because I thought, well, it's AJAT, all Japanese all the time. Everything I look at has to be in Japanese. And funny story, when I was working at a restaurant and I had my manager's phone number, I was trying to add him as a contact. And on the iPhones, if you go in to click the contact, there's a bunch of different options. Share your location, add as a contact. So I accidentally shared my location forever with my manager, and it was really awkward the next day. But yeah, to this day, I do have my devices in Japanese, and it's good now. My reading level's at a more comfortable level, which is what I actually recommend. But if you are learning some specific words, then start changing things bit by bit, whether it's YouTube's interface language or even specific apps on your computer or your phone. Another piece of advice I hear is to watch native media with English subtitles. The thought process behind this is that if you have the English subtitles, you'll associate some of those English words with the Japanese words and sounds that you hear. I did this for the swimming anime Free, by the way, and yeah, I binged all of it. Don't judge me, and no, it didn't help. I just kind of coped my way through the anime, white noise the audio, and just kept telling myself it was still exposure. I came out of it not learning a single new word from white noising the entire anime, and I only knew the character names, and that's because they were proper nouns in the English subtitles. Something I did that made this a bit more helpful was I made a list of anime that I wanted to watch further down the line when I improved a bit, and I just sat down and watched those with English subtitles. That way I had the plot in my mind, so when I came back later and watched it completely in Japanese, I had something to work with. Another piece of advice is that structured study is actually really good, and it is. However, this has led myself and some other people to land in what I call textbook jail. I love the progress that I felt so much from Genki 1 and 2 that I actually jumped straight into another textbook, Tobira Gateway to Advanced. I am a big fan of structured study early on, but the main issue that these textbooks brought is that I go back to chapters I had seen before and realize that I was starting to forget things, so I never truly felt ready to move on from a textbook, when instead I could have dropped the textbooks after my first run through of them and gone on to graded readers, slice of life anime, and easy YouTube stuff to naturally reinforce what I've learned and then build on top of it as a foundation. Moving on to the B tier. Now these are solid pieces of advice that will build discipline, comprehension, and retention. A solid piece of advice and a staple is using SRS tools such as Anki or Migaku to solidify your vocabulary and kanji knowledge. On top of this, something I should have done earlier on in my Japanese journey was using the core decks. For those of you who may not be familiar, these core decks are a collection of some of the most common words in the Japanese language, meaning that these words are going to appear most frequently. Now Anki is a really solid resource and it is free, and I actually do have a video on how to get that set up with Yomitan, a text scanner, in the description. Another really helpful tool that I switched to a few months back is Migaku. They have their own core deck, and it actually gears you up to get ready into watching and comprehending a good amount of native content on Netflix. Their core deck is an awesome starting point because it does teach you a lot of the most common Japanese words that you'll see in a lot of native content. But the real power is in their ecosystem. With a Migaku browser extension, you can click on words while watching anime or reading online, and it automatically saves everything. Audio, sentence, pitch accent, and even screenshots straight into your deck. No copy pasting, no setup headaches. You can also download the mobile app where everything syncs up perfectly and you can study from anywhere, anytime. Turns immersion into a one-click study loop. You watch, you click, and those same words show up later in your reviews, already connected to the context you saw them in. So if you want to make your studying more natural and less manual, check out Migaku. You can check out my affiliate link at migaku.com/jareddesu to get an extra month for free on me. They're also offering 10% off their lifetime plan. If you're willing to spend a bit of money, it's one of my favorite tools out there for language learners who'd like to learn through immersion. Now we did touch on this one earlier, but another solid piece of advice is to study core frequency decks such as the Core 1K or Core 2K. I tried jumping into some of my favorite anime right after finishing Genki 2, and I found that it was a little bit too hard for me at the time, so I went back through to a Core 3K deck. And since I learned a good amount of words from the textbooks, I was able to check off most of those cards and suspend them in Anki, and for the rest, I just ripped those out, and then eventually I was able to go back to that same content, and I felt a little bit more comfortable with it. Through doing these core decks, you'll learn a lot of super duper common words, ones in Japanese such as taberu, kuru, iku, omo, and toki, and knowing some of these super common words are going to make understanding the shows way easier. Now one side effect that came up because of this was that I got addicted to core decks. I downloaded a Core 10K and started ripping that out every day. And what happened is it shifted and took time away from immersion and put it into more time in the SRS app. So I had Anki open for maybe 2 hours a day and then only watched maybe 1 or 2 episodes of anime, which is like 20 to 40 minutes. What I really should have done was use those core decks as a springboard, and once I recognized most of those words, shift my time over to focus on immersion. Another solid piece of advice is to structure and schedule your study habits. Now while nowadays I do focus more on immersion and kind of just watch when I want, earlier on in my journey I had issues with getting my Anki done by the end of the day and feeling like I got enough immersion done. So what really helped me was back then I'd be done with school around 5 p.m. and then I'd have dinner and then I'd just have me time. So I'd have about 4 hours in the evening. And so what I did is that the first hour was non-negotiable Japanese time. So in that time, I had to at least get my Anki done and maybe do a little bit of immersion. And if I was having fun with it, some of that time might leak out past that hour into my me time. With this, I got in the habit of always doing Japanese for at least an hour a day. And as my comprehension went up, I was able to fill in those other 3 free time hours with just watching anime and shows I liked in Japanese. This led my study habits to become more consistent and repeatable, to the point where even when I had those low motivation days, I was still getting the work and the reps in that I needed to do. Another piece of advice I've heard and seen online is to break down native sentences by hand. I found this to be really useful, especially early on for building those comprehension skills. And as you repeat this for more and more grammar structures and sentence patterns, your understandings of those will become more and more intuitive. A quick note that Japanese sentence structure is quite a bit different from English, case in point using this visual right here. I say this because some people do recommend translating to get an idea of what sentences mean, but this can be a little bit detrimental. Whenever I found a Japanese sentence too hard or I just didn't really want to think about it, I would just immediately translate it and then I'd say, oh, I know all of those words, because the vocabulary I knew would be in English, and I'd just be like, yep, I got the sentence, without really truly breaking down the Japanese sentence and understanding how the grammar works. Moving on to the A tier, this is where the real progress begins, connecting structured learning with immersion. One thing I wish I could have learned at the very beginning of my language learning journey was about sentence mining from native content. There's tools to do this in one click and will actually save either audio, a screenshot, and the example sentence to a flashcard, giving you a lot of context to work with. Some free and really popular tools for doing this are Yomitan, a text scanner, as well as ASB Player, where you can drag subtitle files onto any video on the internet. So I found that the reason you want to move away from doing core frequency flashcards and over into doing sentence flashcards from your immersion is that every word is tied to real context, which cements both the meaning and the usage of the word. Towards the bottom of this tier list, I did touch on people who wanted to improve either their accent or intonation in their target language. And a really solid way is to shadow and mimic native audio. So I actually found a Japanese Let's Play gamer on YouTube who I found really interesting. I liked the way he talked, I liked his pacing, so I started to watch his videos over and over again and start talking over him, repeating his lines, copying the pacing, the intonation, and the pitch. You can see it drops at the s. You would typically see a lower pitch where there's no blue line here. Now I'm gonna record myself really quick actually enunciating the u and ohayo gozaimasu so you can see what that would look like. Ohayo gozaimasu. You're gonna see that this pitch is a lot higher only because it is a female speaker and my voice is a little bit deeper than a woman's. Gozaimasu, so it drops here on the u especially. You're gonna see this big drop here when they say su. Now just for kicks and giggles, let me go ahead and totally butcher the pitches for Ohayo gozaimasu, and we will see this. And let's just take a listen to each one really quick so you can kind of at first listen to the tones. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu. Okay, so those are very clearly quite different. Remember, the top one is me, bottom one is the native speaker. So you can see I do way too much of a jump here, and then it actually drops on the yo of Ohio. It should stay flat, but I say Ohio, so you can just kind of see just how wildly different these lines are looking. Another free pitch trainer that was recommended to me recently is Kotu's minimal pairs test. Once I got more comfortable with putting together Japanese sentences, another habit I picked up was doing self-talk or internal monologues. This included things like thinking in Japanese during my daily routines, you know, like kohi nomitai na or kyou wa nani shiyou ka na. I also talked out loud to myself while doing some easy or light tasks like cleaning or cooking. For those of you wondering when you could or should start doing this, my personal recommendation is when you can comfortably understand everyday Japanese and have some vocabulary to express basic thoughts. So earlier on we did talk about incomprehensible input, but let's go on the flip side of things, and a really solid piece of advice is comprehensible input. I use websites like JPDB, which tells you how difficult anime is, and I found shows that I could comprehend around 70 to 80% of. This could be things like Shirokuma Cafe or Komi-san wa Komisho desu. And also to cover all the bases here, if you do want to get into reading easy manga like Yotsubato is a really good start and it can get you kicked off into reading more complex works. Now up in the S tier, I found these pieces of advice to be non-negotiables for continuously improving the language as well as staying motivated. One piece of advice I've heard time and time again, and it holds true, is to use comprehensible input as your main driver. It doesn't matter what stage you're at. Beginner, then you choose easy anime content, slice of life, graded readers, intermediate, NHK easy, transitioning to NHK news, and advanced, really whatever content you want. As long as you're choosing content that's just slightly above your current level, you're going to expand your knowledge of the language and you're going to find a good amount of sentence cards to save. Now the reason why I'm a big fan of comprehensible input is that one, it's engaging because you can understand a good chunk of the content. It also builds natural comprehension, especially for Japanese. It's a highly contextual language, so the more you comprehend, the more context you have to work with, and with that you're going to naturally expand your vocabulary thanks to all of the context from that 70 to 80% comprehension. Another tip here that I like to do is to actually use Japanese subtitles when I'm watching Japanese content. Now at first, I did have a pretty hard time with this, going from structured study and flashcards over to going heavy into that immersion. But one thing I found that really helped was turning on my target language subtitles, in this case Japanese. It gave me more context to work with and helped me follow along better and confirm my readings. And not only that, but I was also able to sentence mine from these subtitles, which helped me create a lot of flashcards in real time along the way. What's so powerful about this is once you lean heavy into comprehensible input during your immersion, your brain starts to learn language through meaning, not by rules or drills, but by understanding messages over time. This next one's a bit more personal, but finding that intrinsic motivation or curiosity. If someone were to ask you, why'd you start studying this language, what would your answer be? It could be things like wanting to understand your favorite YouTuber without subtitles, or reading light novels, or even song lyrics because you genuinely love them. What's kept me going personally is I did a homestay in high school where I couldn't even speak Japanese, my family couldn't speak any English, but they were such sweet people and I felt so frustrated that we couldn't even talk to each other. So 2 years later, when I saved up enough money and got a little bit better at Japanese, I flew back over there to hang out with them, and even though at the time my Japanese wasn't super advanced, I still felt like I got to connect with that host family again in such a genuine way that I wouldn't have been able to do before. And even since then, during my trips to Japan, I've been able to have so many great interactions and make new friends thanks to being even able to speak the language in the first place. It's genuine connections like that and making so many new friends in Japan that's really kept me going. The reason why I think this is one of the most important pieces of advice in this video is that intrinsic motivation is going to keep you going and grinding even after that initial novelty of learning a foreign language might wear off. And lastly, the one that you probably saw coming is full environmental immersion, AJAT style. Now I do think that there was a right way and a wrong way to approach this. So earlier on this video, we touched on switching your device language, and here I feel that it's the same thing. I think that if you're going to surround yourself with your target language completely, it shouldn't be like flipping a switch, it should be more gradual. After I switched my device language to Japanese, I started slowly incorporating some of that into my entertainment. I started out with changing YouTube to Japanese, then Netflix, and then eventually Twitter, so all of my content was 100% Japanese. And with that, I also started following more Japanese accounts, interacting with Japanese content, so that the almighty algorithm of each social media platform would serve me even more Japanese content. I'd also always been into the Japanese music scene, so it wasn't that hard to go down some rabbit holes and find some new favorite artists to put on. Now when it comes to switching your device language, I recommend doing this after you can read comfortably. In doing so, every button, every tab, every click becomes mini input. So yeah, I think the goal is to surround yourself with your target language, but not by force. Just take a step back and look at different facets of your everyday life and slowly transition those to your target language. This is a smoother transition, it's going to be more comfortable, more manageable, and you'll be more likely to avoid burnout. Hopefully this video helped you identify where your current study methods fall and also how to identify good and maybe less good advice out in the wild. I did put this tier list together myself, so if there are any rankings or comments I made that you don't completely agree with, I'd love to hear your thoughts either down in the comments or over in our Discord server. And this took me the longest time to realize, but please remember that there is no perfect method that will get you fluent the fastest. I think it's all about balancing structure and immersion, building that foundation, then letting your target language slowly take over your environment. Also, I'm kind of curious, what are y'all's reasons for starting to study your target languages? Comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, you can let me know by leaving a like, and make sure to subscribe to stay updated on new content. Also, thank you so much to all these wonderful people for supporting the channel. As promised, if you want to check out how to get Anki and Yomitan set up for free, you can do so in the video in this corner. So keep learning, keep immersing, and don't get scammed. See ya.